Good morning, Virgo. Anna here from Virgo. And the person you left behind is processing your absence in ways you haven't fully considered. Subscribe now because this perspective shift matters deeply. Um, there's aftermath unfolding in the space you vacated when you walked away, ripples extending through someone's reality in circles you can't see from your position of necessary distance. And the truth about what your departure triggered in them, what it revealed to them, what it's forcing them to confront about themselves, sits somewhere between validating your choice to leave and complicating your feelings about that choice in ways you might not have anticipated when you were making the decision to go. This isn't message designed to pull you back into connection you needed to exit, isn't manipulation disguised as information, isn't attempt to make you responsible for managing their feelings about consequences they created through their own behavior. This is simply truth about human complexity, about how even justified departures create genuine pain in people left behind, about how someone can simultaneously deserve to lose you and be devastated by losing you, about how your absence from their life is teaching them lessons they apparently couldn't learn while you were still present, still available, still giving them chances they weren't ready to honor properly. And the dam that opens this message, that's recognition of the weight, the complexity, the messiness of walking away from someone who mattered, even though staying would have destroyed you, is less than hash zero. 5 is greater than. That's acknowledgement that doing the right thing doesn't always feel clean or simple, that protecting yourself sometimes means causing pain to someone you still care about, that leaving can be simultaneously the most necessary and the most agonizing choice you make, especially when the person you're leaving isn't pure villain but flawed human who couldn't or wouldn't meet you where you needed to be met. In the particular alchemy of absence, finally teaching what presence couldn't teach, your walking away has become mere. They can no longer avoid looking into, catalyst they can no longer ignore. Wake up call that's loud enough to penetrate defenses that muffled every gentler attempt you made to communicate your needs while you were still there, still trying, still hoping they'd change before you reached the point where leaving became an only option that preserved your sanity and self respect. Let me illuminate what's happening in someone's inner world now that you're no longer in their outer world. In the psychology of being left by someone who mattered, especially when being left was consequence of your own patterns and choices. Certain emotional progressions unfold with predictable stages that vary only in timing and intensity, not in their fundamental architecture. Initial shock gives way to denial. Denial gives way to bargaining. Bargaining gives way to grief that's more honest than any emotion that preceded it. And underneath all these surface responses, if the person has any capacity for self reflection at all, recognition begins dawning that this loss was preventable, that they created the conditions that made you leave, that your departure wasn't random cruelty but direct consequence of how they treated you when they still had you. Your person's current state likely involves some stage of this grief cycle. And depending on their level of self awareness and willingness to sit with uncomfortable truths about themselves, they're either processing this loss with genuine accountability or they're processing it with defensive narratives that protect them from having to acknowledge their role in driving you away. Um, the truth you need to hear exists in the former scenario, in the version where they're actually looking at themselves honestly, actually recognizing what they lost and why they lost it, actually sitting with the ache of your absence in ways that transform rather than just torment them. Watch for signs through mutual networks or through your own intuitive sense of their energy. If they're doing the work or just doing the performance of work, if they're genuinely changing or just temporarily uncomfortable enough to promise change without building the capacity to sustain it, if they're sitting with why you left or just sitting with the fact that you left without examining the causes beneath the effect. These distinctions matter enormously if you're considering whether their transformation is real or whether their pain is just manipulative tool designed to pull you back into patterns that necessitated your leaving in the first place. Some people you walk away from immediately begin genuine transformation. Your absence becomes the medicine that presence never was. The loss breaks something open in them that needed breaking. The pain motivates internal work they'd been avoiding while you were still there, cushioning them from consequences. The empty space where you used to be creates room for them to finally look at themselves instead of always looking at you, at the relationship, at external circumstances they were using to avoid internal examination. You might have left exactly this kind of person. Someone whose capacity for growth was always there, but whose motivation was absent. Someone who needed the catastrophic loss of losing you to finally prioritize their own healing. Someone who's now in therapy, now examining their attachment patterns, now reading books about emotional availability or communication or whatever specific issues contributed to the relationship's deterioration. This doesn't mean you should go back, doesn't mean their growth obligates your return, doesn't mean the door you closed should reopen. Just because they're finally doing work you begged them to do while you were exhausting yourself trying to hold the relationship together alone. Others you walk away from spiral into defensive narratives that protect their ego at the expense of truth. They rewrite history to cast themselves as victim of your unreasonable standards, your sudden departure, your inability to appreciate what they were offering. They focus on your flaws to avoid examining their own. They tell anyone who will listen how they were blindsided by your leaving, conveniently omitting the months or years of you trying to communicate needs they ignored until ignoring them cost them the relationship. These people aren't learning from your absence, they're just resenting it. They're not growing from the loss, they're just bitter about it. And whatever pain they're experiencing is wasted pain because it's not catalyzing any actual transformation. This reflection invites you to consider, based on what you know about this person's patterns and capacity, which category do you think they're in? Let me clarify what you need to hear this truth specifically suggests about why this information matters to you right now. Need implies this isn't just interesting information, but necessary information, something you require for your own peace or clarity or next right steps, something that shifts how you understand your decision to leave in ways that serve your continued healing and growth. The truth might be that they're genuinely devastated and finally understanding what they lost, which could validate that your leaving wasn't overreaction but appropriate response to accumulated harm that they're now recognizing as harm. Or the truth might be that they're exactly who you suspected they were, unchanged and unrepentant, which validates that walking away protected you from further damage they'd have inflicted if you'd stayed. In the validation that comes from learning someone's response to your absence, there's often closure that you couldn't access while the situation was still ambiguous, while you were still wondering if you'd made right choice, if you'd been too harsh, if you'd left too soon or stayed too long, if they'd ever recognized their patterns, or if you'd been imagining problems that weren't really there. Their response to your departure, whether it's genuine accountability or defensive deflection, answers questions you've been carrying, settles uncertainties that were preventing you from fully moving forward, provides data that either confirms you did right thing or reveals they weren't who you hoped they were or could become. It's essential you recognize that knowing their response doesn't obligate your response. Whether they're devastated or indifferent, whether they're growing or stagnating, whether they're reaching out or radio silent, none of that creates requirement for you to do anything with the information except integrate it into your understanding of the situation is less than has home. Zero hash is greater than. Use it to strengthen your boundaries if you need strengthening. Use it to release any remaining guilt if guilt has been haunting you. Use it to further your own healing, regardless of whether their healing is happening or not. Some truths about their response will tempt you to reconsider your departure, especially if they're doing genuine work, showing real change, expressing authentic remorse in ways that land differently than previous apologies that proved hollow. And if you're tempted toward reconciliation, that's human and understandable, but it's also dangerous. Unless enough time has passed for their changes to prove sustainable, unless you're certain you're considering return from strength rather than guilt or loneliness, unless you've examined whether you actually want them back or just want validation that leaving hurt them the way their behavior hurt you. You might be facing exactly this temptation, hearing through networks or sensing through intuition that they're genuinely different, that your absence accomplished what your presence couldn't. And while that's satisfying in its way, deeply validating that you weren't wrong about their capacity for better, it doesn't automatically mean that better should be given to you rather than to whoever they meet next after their transformation completed. Doesn't mean that you should be the one to find out if the change is real by risking yourself again in dynamic that broke you before. Doesn't mean that their growth creates your obligation to witness or participate in the person they're becoming after you left because they wouldn't become that person while you stayed. This reflection invites you to consider, if you learned they were genuinely changed by your departure, would that make you want to return or simply confirm that leaving was the catalyst they needed? Let me address what February 2026 timing suggests about why this message is arriving now. February carries cultural weight around love and relationships, Valentine's season making everyone more contemplative about connections they have or had or want. And this person you walked away from is likely feeling your absence more acutely during month that highlights romantic relationships, during season that makes single people or people who lost someone they loved more aware of the empty space beside them. Their processing of your departure might be intensifying right now. Their recognition of what they lost might be sharpening. Their desire to reach out or their commitment to respecting your boundaries might be tested by seasonal energy that amplifies feelings about love lost. In the heightened emotional atmosphere of February, the person you left might be more likely to break no contact if no contact exists, more likely to send message they've been drafting for weeks, more likely to make gesture they've been considering, because the season gives them framework and permission that other months don't provide, because Valentine's Day creates cultural narrative about grand romantic gestures and second chances and love conquering obstacles, making their impulse to reconnect feel justified rather than boundary violating, at least in their mind. It's critical you prepare for potential contact if contact hasn't happened yet. Decide in advance how you'll respond, rather than being caught off guard by message that triggers all your complicated feelings simultaneously. Have your boundaries clear before they're tested. Have your reasons for leaving fresh in your memory before nostalgia or loneliness or their well crafted words temporarily obscure why you needed to go. Your preparation protects you from impulsive responses you might regret, from saying yes when you mean no because you're caught in an emotional moment, from giving access you've decided not to give if you'd had time to think clearly rather than just react emotionally. Some February reconnection attempts will be genuine. Authentic, vulnerable, honest communication from someone who's been doing real work and wants you to know, not to manipulate you back, but to acknowledge impact you had, to take accountability for patterns that drove you away, to express gratitude for the lessons your departure forced them to learn, even if they hate that it took your absence to teach them. These communications can be received and appreciated without necessarily reopening doors you closed, without necessarily giving them access to you again, without necessarily meaning that anything changes between you just because they've changed internally. You might receive exactly this kind of authentic communication message that lands differently than previous attempts because it comes from a different place in them. And your challenge will be receiving the authenticity without letting it override your wisdom about whether reconnection serves you, is less than has hone. Zero hash is greater than receiving their growth without making it your responsibility to validate or participate in, receiving their acknowledgement without letting it become hook that pulls you back into dynamic you needed to escape, regardless of how different they claim to be now. This reflection invites you to consider, what would you need to see or hear to believe their transformation is real, and would that be enough to make you reconsider your departure? Let me speak to what you should do with this information about their response to your absence. Use it to strengthen your resolve. If you need strengthening, let their pain validate that your relationship mattered, even though it couldn't continue in form it was taking. Let their recognition of what they lost confirm that you weren't imagining problems or being too demanding, but accurately assessing that your needs weren't being met and that staying would have required you to keep abandoning yourself, which you finally, mercifully refused to do anymore, which is why you're here now on the other side of walking away, processing the aftermath rather than still drowning in the dysfunction, in the freedom that comes from validated choices. Even when those choices were agonizing to make, there's peace that settles eventually. Not immediately, not without grief and doubt and second guessing. But eventually you find solid ground under the decision you made. Eventually you recognize that the person you were becoming in that relationship wasn't person you wanted to be, wasn't person you respected or recognized, was diminished version of yourself that you kept accepting as normal until you finally couldn't accept it anymore without violating something essential in your spirit. It's important you don't let their suffering become your responsibility. Don't let their growth become your project. Don't let their transformation become reason you feel obligated to return, because you already gave that relationship everything you had to give, already offered chances they didn't take, already communicated needs they didn't meet. And the fact that your absence finally motivated them to change doesn't mean your presence should reward that change. Doesn't mean your life should become laboratory where they test whether their evolution is sustainable or just temporary performance designed to reclaim what they lost. Some people you left will genuinely transform, and that transformation will benefit whoever meets them next, will create better relationship with future partner who gets upgraded version you helped create through your departure. And that might sting, might feel unfair that they couldn't be that person for you, but they're becoming that person after you. But that's actually beautiful in its way. Proof that even painful endings can serve growth, that even relationships that couldn't survive can teach lessons that improve future relationships, that your time with them, however difficult, wasn't wasted because it catalyzed evolution, even if evolution happened too late to save what you had together. You can be glad they're growing without needing to be part of their continued growth, can be satisfied that your leaving finally woke them up without needing to be there to witness or validate their awakening. This reflection invites you to consider is less than #0. 5# is greater than. Can you hold space for both truths, that they're suffering and growing because you left, and that their suffering and growing don't obligate your return? Damn, if you walked away, the impact of your departure was substantial, created waves in their reality that are still rippling outward, teaching them lessons through your absence that your presence apparently couldn't teach. You need to hear this truth. Whatever they're processing, whatever they're learning, whatever they're feeling about losing you, provides important context for your own healing and your own clarity about whether leaving was right choice. And spoiler, it almost certainly was. Not because they're a terrible person necessarily, but because a relationship that requires someone to walk away to prove point or force growth wasn't healthy relationship worth maintaining in form it existed. And your work is integration, taking whatever truth emerges about their response and weaving it into your understanding without letting it redirect you back toward connection you left for valid reasons. Using their pain to validate your choice without letting their pain manipulate your boundaries, recognizing that people can simultaneously deserve to lose you and be devastated by losing you. That their suffering doesn't mean you did wrong thing, that their growth doesn't mean you should return to witness it, that their transformation, if it's real, can happen without you being part of it, can serve their future relationships without needing to resurrect past relationship that ended because it needed to end. May you trust that leaving was right, even when it feels heavy. May you honor their pain without absorbing responsibility for it. May you recognize that their growth validates your choice more than it obligates your return. May you keep walking forward into life that's yours to build without them. You walked away for reasons. Those reasons remain valid. Their response, whatever it is, doesn't change that. Your freedom matters more than their regret. Remember this: the fact that someone finally recognizes your value after you leave doesn't mean you should return so they can benefit from the recognition you needed them to have while you were there. Doesn't mean your absence should become presence again, just because absence taught them what presence couldn't teach. Means your leaving was powerful enough to break through their defenses, was significant enough to force the growth you couldn't force by staying. Means you were right to go, even if going hurt you both, even if going left them devastated, even if going created genuine transformation you'd hoped for, while you were exhausting yourself trying to catalyst change that only your departure could ultimately create. They're processing your absence. You're building your presence elsewhere. Both can be true. Your path doesn't have to loop back to theirs.